All right, folks, welcome back to Procreate. So, you've got your rocket this far, you've got this base shape, and now we're going to go ahead and we're going to lock the base rocket layer, and we're going to go ahead and lock the symmetry layer. Now, with my shading layer selected, I'm going to begin working in my grayscale palette. Now, if you don't have a grayscale palette, it's as simple as maybe pulling 7 different types of gray, values of gray, and putting them together. I like to start in the middle because you can always make it darker. You can always make it a little bit lighter, but you can't really start out dark and then you realize, wow, I went way too dark off the bat. So I'm going to start somewhere over here, maybe the third or fourth area in. You see how I'm kind of in the center of this thing? And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use my soft airbrush for this initial rendering. So I've got the opacity fairly up. I've got the size fairly up. And now I'm going to go ahead and just start sketching in with my soft airbrush. Now what I'm doing here is I'm defining what is where, right? You see that this is half the fin. So I'm going to start defining half the fin. And then we've got some of this going on over here. So we're going to go ahead and make sure that we're in good shape there. And I'm defining where that fin is, what's in front of what. I'm going to raise up this side. I'm going to drop down the opacity. And all I'm really doing here is kind of setting the stage for the shape of my rocket. So we're going to drop down the size, the opacity. And there's really no it's done when. You can go ahead and do it and finish it whenever you really want. What I do is when I can see the shapes clearly identified, and if it had to stand on its own as a grayscale piece, and it was pretty good, I would call that close enough for horseshoes and hand grenades. But some people go all the way to Wonderland with it. We don't have time for that here. So what I'm doing here is I'm also getting an idea so that when I do the symmetry portion of this, I know who's on top of who and what's on top of what and all that kind of stuff. Okay. And it's a very slow buildup. I'm not saying that it's an immediate thing. This will take you a lot of time to figure out when enough is enough. And now you see there, I'm now going to kick it down to a little smaller, or I guess less intense shade of gray to do this portion. Okay. I'm pretty good there. I think I'm pretty good here. Using my gestures to kind of work through, make sure that I know what I'm doing. Who's on first, who's on second type of thing. Okay, and then we're going to go a little bit to the darker side now. I'm going to go take my airbrush down a little bit notch, and I'm going to come into here, and I'm going to really kind of blow this out now. You can put a hard line in your work. I don't. I come from a tattooing background where we did have to use lines because over 20, 30 years of a tattoo, the line work is the thing that really holds up, especially in the early days of pigment. But I also come from an airbrushing background where you would not do a hard line a lot of the times. You would let the piece stand on its own. So it's a nice little balance there. Sometimes I do a hard line, sometimes I don't. Okay, we're going to go ahead and raise that up a little bit and then drop the opacity down a little bit. I'll tell you folks, rarely, only very rarely in life do you ever have to do anything at full-on opacity. Most of the time, everything is subtle. Digital art really is subtle. It's a slow, subtle buildup of different tones, shades, values, colors. Rarely will you ever go through and go, I'm going full-on opacity and full-on saturation. It's usually the mark of an immature artist. Okay, so I think I'm fairly good there. You got the basic idea. The last thing that you could do if you really wanted to, you could do a little bit of very, very light gray, crank up the brush size a little bit, come almost fully off this thing, And you see how I'm applying a little bit of gray on the side of this to make it a little more tubular? You could go down this route, but with the multiply, it really won't do you any good. There's a lot of other techniques for that. All right, so now the last piece of this, now this is where the magic happens. Stay with me. We're going to deselect now. I'm going to come over to my base rocket, and I'm going to unlock it. Unlock the rocket. All right. Now we're going to select it. We're then going to duplicate that layer. We're going to select it, and then we're going to flip it. Now make sure your magnetics are on. You see that that blue magnetic stripe is checked. And you're going to place the rocket right on top of the other one. Now, if you unselect and we bring it down, you get an idea of where you are with that. You can get a little bit better idea here. I think we're in pretty good shape right about there. We can make some subtle adjustment. Now, if it looks like the magnetics are causing issues, you can go freeform and you can get it a little bit closer. This is part of the trick of symmetry. You're going to have to do a little bit of adjustment. It's never going to be full-on perfect. Sketchbook Pro does a tremendously better job at symmetry than the other. All right, now watch what happens. I'm going to take the base rocket layers and I'm going to pinch them together to create one. Perfect. Now I'm going to come over. Now we can use my smudge tool. And watch what happens now. I'm eliminating the center line through use of my smudge tool. Oops, got a little bit too smudge happy there. Let's go ahead and use a hard brush. And we're going to smudge. There we go. How about that, huh? There we go. Right brush for the right time. Now that's how you eliminate your center line out of this equation. Now if you needed to do a little bit more, you can always come in with a paintbrush, and then you can color pick. You guys know how to work the color picker, and you can color pick and brush it away that way too. Let's go ahead and grab a modified round brush. All right, you see how that black is disappearing? All right, now we're going to do the same thing over here. Select your shade, duplicate your shade, and you see how it got super dark. Go to your transform tool, flip your shade, and now move it into position. All right, I think we're pretty good at that point. Now, what are we going to do? We're going to merge those two shades, and then, pow, one shading layer multiplied out. Now, we take our soft airbrush, and we can finish kind of grayscaling this bad boy out. So we can go through, shade out some of that middle line there. I'm going to go ahead and smudge this around a little bit. See how we're kind of getting rid of the middle ground? Now, the lines around the rocket ship are a little bit rough. Don't worry about those outer lines. Not too worried about them right now. All I'm doing is I'm kind of pushing just this shading around the screen, making sure that I'm pretty good here. I'm going to go up to this tail fin. I'm going to go ahead and shrink that bad boy down, crank the opacity up, and we're going to go sort this out. Okay, you see how I'm getting rid of that middle line. Now, when I've got rid of the middle line, I now have another problem. I've got to go back to my airbrush. I've got to grab my grayscale palette, and I've probably got to put in a little bit different midline. All right. So there's a lot of adjustment to be done after you go through and do the merge on a symmetrical design. I tend not to mess with the middle a lot until I've already got them merged. So your job here in this area is now to go through, select your base layers, select your shading layer, and then combine them, flip them, and create your finished rocket there so we can go ahead and take the next step. All right, folks, I'm going to go ahead and cut this video here. Go ahead and try that, and then we'll take the next step. See you in the next one.